Very cool. Especially like the solo. Dorian the Mandalorian. Today we will start Daniel chapter 3, so please get situated in your Bibles, your gadgets, or just stare at the projection in front of you. We are going through these stories that are found in the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. Very familiar stories. This one, like the one previous to this, we will do just the first half, and then we'll cover the second half eventually. So today we will cover Daniel chapter 3 for verses 1 to verse 18. And just as a introduction of sorts, this is, people say that, and I'm sure I've said this before about other passages, but this is truly the favorite story passage that I have in the Bible. So it was neat to just kind of look at it once again and study for it and share it with you guys. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar when he built, constructed that golden image and required people to worship it. Right? So again, all of these stories are very familiar, so when we go through it, everything kind of rings a bell. By the end of it, I'll highlight something that is particularly noteworthy, but there's nothing really here that you probably have not heard before. As we have been doing, we will take it one portion at a time, pause, talk about it a little bit, and then continue towards the end, not the very end, but the end of what is allotted for today. So let's take a look at the first 3 verses of Daniel chapter 3. And it says here, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So here we have the introduction of the story, and as I mentioned, a very familiar story of King Nebuchadnezzar, once again, the most powerful human on earth at this particular time, and he builds, not himself, but he has, obviously his servants build this huge image of gold. We don't know exactly what it looked like. If you go through some Bible illustrations, you will see a varied amount of possibilities. It might have looked like an actual human image. It might have just been something a little bit more streamlined, like a monument of sorts. We don't have that type of information. The only information that we have here is the fact that it was made out of gold, and even that, there's a question whether or not if it was solid gold or if maybe the structure, very likely the structure was made out of wood, and then it was gold-plated. Just based on the measurements, it would have cost way too much money. So the measurements here are in cubits, but if we were to translate that into feet, it would be 90 feet by 9 feet. Imagine something like that made out of solid gold. Unlikely, even though possible. But again, maybe just something that had the skeleton made out of wood, but gold-plated. But regardless of that, that was what he had made. Now, the benefit of us studying Daniel and every other book that we study, as we do from cover to cover, from beginning to end, is the fact that we have context, right? We have context to rely upon. It's fresh in our minds. We don't have to build it up too much. Because often, when we hear this type of story, or this one in particular, isolated from context, it's interesting, but with context, it makes it even more interesting. Why? We saw what happened in the previous chapter. Now, we don't know if these events happened right after, years after. It's very likely this happened years after the documented episode of chapter 2. But again, just to refresh your memory, the story previous to this one was the story about Nebuchadnezzar and his dream. And he was tormented by that dream, wanted to figure out what it was all about. No one could interpret that dream except Daniel, who received this information from God himself. And he not only told Nebuchadnezzar about the dream, but translated the dream, deciphered the meaning of the dream. And in gist, more or less, the dream had to do with this human-like image, and it was made out of several different types of elements, metals mostly. Golden head, and then it went to silver, it went to iron, and then eventually the base was made out of a mixture of iron and clay. And the meaning of that was this transition from Nebuchadnezzar's empire, which was the head made out of gold. That information was the only one that we had for sure, and the other empires that would come thereafter, who in one way or another would decrease in glory. We don't know exactly what that meant, but that was the revelation that Nebuchadnezzar received through Daniel from God. So take that into consideration. Nebuchadnezzar knew a few things. First of all, he was the golden head, meaning he was at the top of the food chain. He was the one that was most precious. He was the one that was thought of as the most glorious. But also, he knew that his time was limited. Because again, part of the interpretation was that other empires would come after, succeed his empire, which means that his empire, his reign, would eventually cease to exist. Now, transition to chapter 3. What do we have? We have very likely, I'm like 99% sure. I try not to ever say 100% because there's, people will always say, aha, here I found the verse that totally refutes that. But I'm 99% sure that initially, as we saw it documented in the Bible, when Nebuchadnezzar heard the interpretation of his dream, he was humbled, right? He said so. He described the awe that he had experienced praising the God of Daniel, who was able to reveal, decipher, interpret that dream. So again, he had an experience. But years after, we don't know if it was 1 year, we don't know if it was 5 years, we don't know if it was a decade after. It was a good bit of time after, very likely. His heart changed a little bit. And he started to get worried. Why? Time is expiring. Time is moving forward. When is this going to occur? How is this going to happen? And it seems like, even though Nebuchadnezzar accepted that truth at one point in time, as time went on, he started to rebel against that truth. He started to reject that truth. He wanted to counter the boundaries and the limitations of that truth. So what does he do? He says, oh, okay, just the head made out of gold? Nah, I don't think so, buddy. I'm going to make an image that is completely made of gold. And what does this mean? What does this symbolize? This symbolizes that it's not only the head. Everything is made out of me. I will last. I will persevere. The silver, iron, clay, baloney. My reign will continue for as long as I say. No God, no wise man, no dream is going to dictate boundaries or limitations, because again, I am the great Nebuchadnezzar. And this is very true about the essence of sin, isn't it? What is the essence of sin? The essence of sin is not accepting limitations nor boundaries. Sin is, in fact, just a manipulation of something that at one point or another was either created or established by God as a norm, as a godly thing, and eventually, through temptation, through, this fallen nature that we experience, and this reality that is less than ideal, that we all live in and share, all of those things that God created for godly purposes, they become manipulated. They become skewed. They become distorted. Why? Because there are limitations. There are boundaries. There are standards. God says, do this, but not that. Go to here, but not beyond. And then we say, okay, no problem. Seems legitimate, seems fine. We'll totally agree. But as time goes on, we start getting close to that established line, the fence, the wall, and then we peek over. We try to look at the proverbial grass on the other side, whether or not if it's green as inside or greener. And then we gaze into the horizon, and then we start feeling like it is so confining. It is so limiting. How cruel of a God that does not allow us to spread our wings and experience life to the fullest. And then we hop the fence. We stumble, we fall over, land on our heads, but dust ourselves off and run like we are free, like we are finally free, only to figure out that true liberty and freedom were always within those established boundaries, because beyond is only torment. Beyond is only torture. Beyond, we become captives of our own desires. We become slaves, no longer having choices, but totally dominated by those freedoms that we desired. That is essentially what sin is. This is what Nebuchadnezzar was very likely experiencing. Not wanting to submit to God's will for his life. The limitations, the boundaries. So he said, nope, not going to have it. It is not going to end, and I will show everyone who is in charge. So, what does he do? As stated here, not only is this image, again, we don't know exactly what it looked like, but the image was erected, it was built and set up in a very strategic place. And for its inauguration, Nebuchadnezzar sent word to all of the important people in his kingdom. Come on over and let's start this with a bang. I want everyone to travel, to come, so we can celebrate, we can inaugurate this beautiful image that I have created. And then, going forward, from verse 4 to verse 7, not only were people to gaze upon and be in awe of this image that was created, they were actually supposed to do something else. What were they supposed to do? There was a command attached to this gathering and all other gatherings thereafter. Verse 4, then a herald cried out aloud, to you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at that time you hear the sound of a horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, symphony with all kinds of music. You shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So that was the instruction, that was the command, and the command was also attached to a punishment if people did not agree or follow through with said command. They were to gather, and very likely this was a special event, again, an inauguration, but this would establish a standard that would remain. At the inauguration, all of the important people were gathered in the capital of sorts, in this very strategic place. And they were to, again, be in awe, gaze upon this image, and when music, when sounds of instruments would come up, be introduced, they were to all bow down and worship that image, adore that image, deify and glorify that image. And as a consequence, if they chose to disobey, they would be put into a fiery furnace. Is there any other type of furnace other than a fiery furnace? I always wondered that. Seems kind of redundant. Fiery furnace as opposed to an icy furnace. But anyways, there was a punishment attached to the command, so that people knew that Nebuchadnezzar was for real, that he really wanted people to do this. Why? Once again, he was reluctant to accept his fate. And if people rejected his command, then it would weaken his authority. Wouldn't you agree? If the king said to do something and people decided not to, that's kind of the beginning of the end. Because then his influence and his authority, they start to diminish. So he was very serious and stern about this. He wanted to make sure that people understood who he was, how he was, and that he would continue to be for as long as he wanted to. The image basically became a god, an idol. He kind of worded it that it was one of his gods or his favorite god, but in essence, he was going to be worshipped because he was the one establishing all of these norms. And even he referred to it, he implied a little later on that that was in actuality his intent in the back of his mind. But anyways, this was the decree, this was the new norm that people had to adhere to. Now, for practical purposes, people who are not in the capital, who could not see the image and who could not hear the instruments, they didn't have to do it. It was beyond that day and time. It was just whoever was kind of passing by. But this affected certain people. Remember Daniel and his friends? In the previous chapter, we read through and went through the story, and we know that at the end of the story, because Daniel was able to receive this revelation from above and give the insight to the king, he was rewarded along with his friends, and they were put into a position of authority. Daniel, more so, but also his friends. And their hub was kind of around the capital. Even though Daniel, again, had more authority, more influence, and more power, the friends also shared in that authority and had a prestigious position in the king's court. So this would have affected all of them. And now we have a situation where there is a dilemma. What to do? It's interesting that on verse 7, and I'll read that again. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down, worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All the people. All the people. All the people. Except, as you probably know, 3. What does that tell us about majorities? I've said this before and I'll say it again. Not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time in the Bible, and very likely in the world, the majority is wrong. The majority is wrong. What does that tell us about how we should deal in the world that we live in? We need not get caught up on numbers, on the loudest voices. We need not get caught up on just math and trends and the ways of the world, the new fads, the new truths and norms. Why? Because very often the majority is completely and utterly wrong. So we go on with the story. And now, from verse 8 to verse 15, there is somewhat of a plot against Daniel's friends. So, as we saw before, Daniel and his friends, they were part of this select group. In general, wise men and people who would counsel the king in various different ways. Daniel was the head honcho. The friends were right up there as well, even though they were, below Daniel in one way or another. And there are others that were included in this group. Some of them, I suppose, were originally from Babylon. They were Babylonians. Just like Dorian is a Mandalorian. They were Babylonians, and you would expect that they would be a little bit jealous, because these were foreigners, right? First of all, there's that story that they eat vegetables, but they look better than everyone. If you just start there, you already get kind of ticked off, right? How come you just eat vegetables and water and you look better than me? And then, again, they were praised for that. They were recognized because they were just better. And then we have the second story, which highlighted that and emphasized that even more. These were captives. These were conquered people. How dare they be above us, who have been here for longer, who should have those positions. So again, like in any other place where, people want to hold positions higher than others, you'd have a little bit of jealousy. And this jealousy provoked a plot. So from verse 8 to verse 15, it says, "Therefore, at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up.' Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you fall down and worship and worship the image which I made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?'" So they were thrown under the bus. There's a lot of people. We don't know how long it took for the friends to be caught in the act or lack of act. We know that they never adhered to this norm, and because there was some backstabbing, jealousy involved, some of the wise men noticed, hey, where are they? Every single time that the sound comes and that we're here bowing to this image, I don't see them anywhere. They are never here. Let's figure out what's going on. Eventually, they found out that they never adhere to this norm. Now, side note, open parentheses. Where's Daniel? We have no idea where Daniel is. We are never told, so it's all speculation. But because he held a higher position, it is likely, or at the very least possible, that he was traveling around because he had dominion over a greater scope of the empire. So maybe he just wasn't there. While these friends who held positions of importance, they stayed mostly localized. They didn't have the obligations that Daniel had. So very likely Daniel just wasn't there at that particular time or that time frame. Close parentheses. But anyways, so now the king is made aware, hey, these three, which I have established in a, very special position, they are not being obedient to me. If you're the king and if you want your reign to last, this is the last thing you want to happen. Your subjects, especially those who you have put in a position of authority, rejecting your commands, this is the beginning of the end. You do not want you want to nip this in the bud so that others will learn from this lesson, from their mistake. But it seems like he was actually somewhat reasonable, and he gave them a chance. He said, okay, is this happening? Is this real? All right. Next time this occurs, make sure that you follow through with my expectations. Imagine the pressure, right? Imagine the pressure to compromise. If you're these three dudes, you know what's going to happen. You know the king means business. You have put in a situation which is impossible. From human terms, impossible. You've been reluctant to do so because you know what is right. But now you've been caught, and you have to react. There's no more subtlety here. You cannot blend in anymore. He knows, and now he is watching you. The very next time, he wants you to be doing what everyone else is doing. Incredibly difficult situation to be put into. Verse 15 is very ironic. Again, let me read that to you. The second part of it, but if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? What is he saying there? I am in charge. You may have your little gods like everyone has their gods. I have made this image. This image is to be worshipped. But I am the one who is in charge. Even the God that this image represents, he owes me because I have established it in him. In this very honorable position with this decree. I am the one. I am the one who is in charge. And if you decide, if you dare to disobey me, your little God, do you think your little God is going to do anything about this? Compare this to his words in the previous chapter on verse 47. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. The drastic change, slowly but surely, the limitations that the one and only true God, which here he acknowledged, now it was eating up from the insides. And his pride and his hunger for power, his focus on the self, could not accept to be under someone else, to have a Lord, to be told what to do. Now the friends, Daniel's friends, now they have to do something. They must react. They must respond. They can't just continue doing what they've been doing. So what happens? Look what it says from verse 16 to 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. As I stated, this is my favorite passage in the Bible, by far. There's something to be said about faith. But this is next level, wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you agree? We understand the term. We try to live by it. We are confronted and challenged to exercise it almost on a daily basis. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And here we have this, it's as good as an example of what faith should be as I've ever seen. And by no means have I ever gotten close to this, but it's something to aspire to. What is happening here? First of all, again, they are literally talking to the most powerful human on earth, but they know that there is someone even more powerful. Borrowing from Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 10, fear not he who can kill the body, but not the soul. Yet fear him who can kill both the body and the soul in hell. They acknowledged the fact that God could. That was not a doubt. They weren't even willing to argue with the king, which means that this was a principle that was non-negotiable. Did you catch that? The king was kind of being, okay, let's figure this out. Let me know. Sleep on it. Next time around, my eyes are open and I want to see progress. What do they say? Pfft, we can answer you right now. We don't need to wait. You don't argue with principles. You argue with things that are kind of like you're wavering back and forth. Possibly you could change your mind. You don't argue with principles. If you know it's true, you know it's true. And there's nothing that can be said or done that is going to alter that. So I can just give you the answer right now. Their faith was such that they knew, they acknowledged the fact that God was higher, God was more powerful, infinitely more, and could save them. But then they add this. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Wow. There's this quote. I didn't make it up, but it's a great quote. And it says this: faith is not believing in spite of evidence. It's obeying in spite of consequence. Once again, faith is not believing in spite or despite of evidence. It's obeying in spite of consequence. Faith is founded on reality. That we must acknowledge. We don't have blind faith. We don't have theoretical faith. Faith is founded on reality, but it should never be based on desirable outcomes. You should not have faith because you expect something desirable to happen. It is founded upon something real that you know it is true and you will not budge. Despite the consequences and the outcome, that continues to be true. So in actuality, in real life, faith is more clearly experienced, not because of things, but despite of things. Faith is more clearly experienced despite of circumstances, regardless of what is happening. Despite of your fears and of your worries. Despite of your wishes and your wants and your desires. Despite of your sinful inclinations and my even much more so. Despite of all those things and much more, we have faith. Our faith is not bound by what might happen. It is secured by the knowledge of what has already happened. We know what happened, which is why, regardless of what may happen in the future, we continue to have faith. Amen.